Well, welcome everybody. My name is Rich Colgard. I'm the publisher of Forbes magazine. I also write a column called Innovation Rules. And I'm very intrigued by this subject, the puzzle of personnel. I happen to have a book that's just out on corporate culture, and I've been immersing myself in it, and am thrilled to be talking with the experts that we have on the panel today in the context of this economic recovery that has some weird aspects to it. There's, as everyone knows, unemployment is still distressingly high. People, once they're out of the workforce, have a hard time getting back in, especially in a certain age. There's a big mismatch between the what employers want and what the workforce has to offer in all too many cases. And we're going to tackle all those subjects and more. Let me make a quick introduction of everybody on the panel. To my far left is Paul McKinnon, who's the head of human resources and talent at Citi, and has really covered the field here, not only with a financial institution, but was at Dell in a similar role during Dell's fast growth era in the 1990s. Next to Paul, we have Larry Kaiser, who's the president and CEO of Temple University Health System and is the dean of Temple School of Medicine. To my immediate right is Kay Foster Cheek, who's a philanthropist but is the former head of global human resources at Onyx Pharmaceuticals. Next to her is Wei-Li Chong, the executive vice president of Knowledge Universe. And then on the far right is Greg Capelli, the CEO of Apollo Group. So this is going to be a lot of fun. Let me start with you, Greg, and let's talk about this mismatch of what employers say they want and what education is giving them, particularly in this context where it's tragic that we have this kind of a mismatch and, when we have this kind of unemployment.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. It's nice to be here with all of you. And it's a question that we've been wrestling with the last 5 or 6 years, because there's so much talk every single day, politically and in business, about the unemployment rate in this country, and the number of jobs, upwards of 30 million people who are on the sidelines or want a better job, aspire to have a better job in this country. Yet it never made sense to me that there's now up to 4 million jobs that are posted that aren't being filled by all these people who are sitting on the sidelines. And so the question is, why is that, and how do we fix it? And from my perspective at Apollo Education Group, we come at it from an education approach. We are used to dealing with post-secondary, post-high school education and training, not only domestically, but now internationally in 17 countries. And it's a common theme that you see. Businesses need to work with governments and educators, whether you're within a traditional university or in some area of training, to bring this together so that there's good discussion and we can solve these issues. From what I see, and we've gone coast to coast talking to CEOs, we've gone around the world talking to leaders of companies, widely complaining that they can't get the human capital that they need to grow their organizations. Now that's interesting to me, since we have a lot of human capital that's able in this country to do the jobs. It's connecting them. So there are over 60% of all the jobs that are available only take less than a year of training or education.
Yeah, that is
get them ready.
That is tragic, particularly when you look at publicly traded companies in the United States. The strength of their balance sheets suggests that they certainly do have the ability to hire people if they could find those people. Wei-Li, is it oftentimes the answer that people will put forth about this mismatch is we need to really boost STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, and that we're weak there in a world that demands more and more STEM skills. Is it as simple as that?
You know, I think from an education standpoint, there's definitely the focus around STEM. I think from the world that we come from with Knowledge Universe, there's so much focus in just changing the language of education, particularly in children, even under the age of 6 is where we focus on. And it's just simply establishing children with a love of learning and when you have that, our research is showing, and we're on this quest to just validate the impact of early childhood education in shifting families away from the normal notion of daycare. I have to go to work and I just need to drop my kids off and gosh, I hope they are fundamentally being cared for. That's important, but what they're doing during the day we're finding is even more important. And our studies are showing that it's paying off. So having children beginning school with that fundamental love of learning then enables them to get into more education related to STEM, really finding what they're passionate for, and understanding that you can wire a brain to love learning. When you do that, that actually has a huge impact.
Yeah, but the traditional models, public school, everybody tends to love their own public schools. But if you live in an upper middle class or affluent neighborhood, the public schools are generally pretty good here. But the numbers are very sobering about where American public school graduates stack up against almost every other first world economy.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think when we just look at our economy, Kay and I were just saying it seems like there is a world of haves and have-nots, and how do we really bring those together, particularly in our country, to give everybody the best chance for success? About 30% of our children are subsidized, so we deal with them every single day, and when we think about those studies and in giving children the best shot, we have a remarkable opportunity just really to focus around laying that foundation of learning.
Well, we'll come back and talk about education. I think the size of this room is intimate enough that we will probably have some time for audience questions with about 15 minutes to go. So think about, as you hear the panelists, if you want them to follow up on any of the points they've raised. But Kay, I want to switch topics slightly here and talk about the makeup of the workforce today, and it's so much more diverse by race, by gender, and by age. Mm-hmm. I mean, the attitudes across different age groups are really as starkly different, I think, as they have been, and particularly millennials. Mm-hmm. I mean, how do you motivate millennials today?
I think that is probably the thing that most employers are struggling with. But I'll tell you now that certainly now, having spent 30+ years, I was head of human resources for Johnson & Johnson, worked at Pfizer, and then at a biotech company that we just sold. So if you think about across 3 very different types of companies, what we came to understand was there are a set of core principles that really, and values that most employees that are coming into the workforce are really looking for. And I think what happens is we get so caught up in the understanding and the segmentation of the workforce, the millennials versus the boomers versus the Gen X versus the Gen Y. And all of our work has told us that the big aha is, irrespective of which of those particular demographic categories you belong to, you want to work at work that is meaningful. You want to do work that continues to allow you to contribute. You want to get feedback about your contribution. Where the demographic factors matter is the delivery of that particular value. So let me give you an example. Initially, a lot of the research said that millennials wanted feedback, and by extraction we said, well, boomers didn't. Well, it's not true. We discovered that across those demographic sectors, everybody wanted to get feedback about how they were doing, what was the value of their contribution. What we discovered is you can text a millennial and he or she will be quite content with that method of delivery. Whereas with the boomer generation, typically they have grown up, we, myself included, have grown up in a context with a little bit more formality, and therefore you might be looking for much more interaction. But it's inaccurate to say that because you belong to a particular demographic sector, you come to the workforce and you have a very different set of expectations. Your expectations about the delivery of the benefits or the experience in the workforce is what employers really need to focus on. And I know we will get into a discussion probably of the fact that if you work for Google and you have 8 cafeterias and you can bring your dog to work and you can sit on a rollerball. But at the end of the day, those things are really about how do you connect and engage with employees, because irrespective of where you are across the spectrum, what you want to do is to feel a sense of engagement and connected to the work that you do. So my goal is really, my hope and my goal is really about shifting the nature of the conversation, as opposed to focusing on we've got to do something radically different and reshape our workforces because we're having a generation that's coming in that wants things that are fundamentally different than the rest of the workforce.
Well, when you mentioned the cafeterias and the massage therapists and all the things that Google has, you know, Google is one of those companies that makes always makes the best places to work list, generally the magazines that publish these best places to work lists spend an awful lot of time talking about the cafeterias and the massage therapists and so forth. But it really is a lot deeper than that. So just a two-part question is it worth it to put the effort into making those best places to work list? Does it correlate to other things? Does it give a company a stronger immune system or make it more innovative? Or is it just sort of a vanity thing?
So I'll give you two perspectives. One, as the head of HR for Johnson & Johnson, we believed it was competitively important for us to pursue, because you pursue, irrespective of whether people think that that's something that's granted to you, you actually pursue and pursue very aggressively those lists. And we actually had a small team of people that prepared all the material that's required to get entrance on those lists. And so for us, we believed it was competitively important. One of the world's largest companies, always regarded as a company with a strong set of values, as an organization, there was almost an expectation that we needed to be on that list. And we didn't necessarily find a strong correlation, interestingly enough, between talent and the ability to attract and retain talent and presence on that list. So that list for Johnson & Johnson, and I would argue companies at that stage, is much more about being part of your competitive set. I then went to a mid-sized biotech company in Silicon Valley, and I made a decision that we would not pursue that list, that what we would do instead is really take the effort and the energy and the time in being very intentional about the kind of culture we wanted to create, because we knew that we needed to be able to, it was a place where talent really made a difference. It wasn't something that we said. We knew that we could not survive. We could not bring drugs to the market. We could not get NDAs filed. We could not get to the FDA in record time with life-saving oncology products unless we had superior differentiated talent. And for us, the way to do that was to spend our energy and time and focus on creating the kind of culture that enabled people to be attracted to us, wanting to be a part of our organization, and feeling really deeply engaged with the mission. And that really created a virtuous cycle. And we chose not to pursue the best places to work list. Just offering you two different perspectives.
Yeah, well, I want to carry this idea forward a little bit and share a discussion or part of a debate that I had between two different companies that look at this completely differently. One is SAS, the analytics company in North Carolina, $3 billion. If you haven't heard of it, it's because it's privately held, but they always finish in the top 5 on those lists. They have this campus that looks like a beautiful college. They have child care, they have Olympic-sized swimming pools and all of that kind of stuff. Debating somebody who used to work at Amazon, and Amazon is a very tough culture. They have one of the highest turnover rates in all companies across all industries. I think of all S&P 500 companies, they have the 3rd highest turnover rate. Jeff Bezos doesn't care. To him, working at Amazon is sort of like working at the Marines. It's not a nourishing culture, it's a tough culture. And yet, both of these companies are tremendously successful, at least Amazon's successful in growth. So I want to ask you, Paul, you've been involved at Citi and you've been involved at Dell, different cultures. Is really the art of having the most productive workforce really mapping it to the industry you're in, whether you're a growth industry, whether you're not in a growth industry? I mean, there seem to be many routes to a highly productive culture.
You know, what I was interested in when you and I, we talked about that issue before, is not not so much the total turnover, but is Amazon able to keep the people that they absolutely have to have? Have they figured out that there's a certain subset of the total population that's critical for them? And if they have a mechanism of identifying those people and keeping those people engaged to the point that we heard earlier, then I think about that differently. And I think Mr. Bezos, or Bezos, I think he's just got a view that we're going to have a meritocracy and the very best people are going to get more of everything, and we're going to push hard for that. Now there's some consequences to that. It's a little bit Darwinian from time to time, but it has, clearly it's worked for him.
And so, well, describe, if you would, because I found it so interesting, the difference between a company that was growing almost exponentially, as Dell was for a long time, and Citi, a company that is not growing. How does that factor alone change the way?
Let me say, if you want to manage talent, it's a lot easier in a company that's growing and the stock price is going up, right? It's a lot easier, right? Because first of all, people have a predisposition to stay, and second of all, there's more things for them to go do. In a rapidly growing company, people are sucked through the system, right? New opportunities are created, and you move people along. At Citi, it's gotten nothing but smaller for the last 6.5 years since I've been there. And in a declining company where you have fewer and fewer people, it's much more difficult to find places to put them. I had mentioned earlier that years ago, Rosabeth Kanter from the Harvard Business School said that politics are worst where opportunity is least. And so in a company where things are shrinking, elbows come up, people get a little more productive, and that means it's harder to move people across boundaries. And moving people across boundaries is one of those things that absolutely accelerates people's development. So you have more choices in a growing company than you do in a shrinking company.
Larry, I saved you for last because you're a doctor, you're head of a medical school, and so the issues that you have are in many ways unique to the issues that most people in the audience or on the panel have. But describe some of the key issues that you have to contend with at the university.
I would expand the context a little bit. I think with the Affordable Care Act, and seemingly, at least the hope is that more people will have insurance. It hasn't quite worked out that way, but access to care is going to be an issue, and from our standpoint in the workforce, it's one thing to increase the number of spots in medical schools, but where we get locked in terms of creating more in the workforce are the postgraduate spots, and we currently are fixed. And again, Medicare pays for postgraduate medical education by and large, and that's part of the original Medicare statute. But in 1997, with the Balanced Budget Act, that Act fixed the number of spots that Medicare would pay for at 1996 levels. So if we want to increase the number of cardiologists or the number of family practitioners, we need to increase the number of spots, and Congress has not been really willing to do that. The Affordable Care Act had a very, very small increase, proportionally speaking, a very, very small increase in the number of residency spots. And that even plays out more. We have, and with Greg sitting over there, I mean, we have a number of these offshore medical schools now that are putting out graduates. Less than 50% of them are able to get back into this country and getting residency spots now. So you now have people with a medical degree and student loans, I might add, on the range of probably $200,000, who can't get residency spots and therefore cannot work, cannot become part of the workforce. So we're going to have issues in access, my own specialty in cardiovascular surgery. We have about 100 spots right now in the postgraduate level. We're getting about 40 or 50 people in the match each year. It's a different demographic entering medical school these days. They're much more interested in lifestyle issues. That's to say, those of us at this age, we're not particularly interested in lifestyle issues. And again, in terms of the environment, I mean, in the surgery residency, it was abused, belittled, and criticized is the way that surgery residents were treated then. We were on every other night, but that's all changed. But lifestyle issues are much more important, and the specialties that are attracting individuals really are those that play into lifestyle. So you're going to see problems with access because we're not getting people into the workforce, we're not getting them into the areas we need. How do you tell somebody you have to go into a primary care specialty? There are currently no incentives, by and large, to do that. So we're going to continue to have issues, and especially in certain specialties, and it's not just in primary care, it's in some of the specialties. So those are the issues that, that I deal with. In terms of getting in, I mean, I had 11,000 applicants this year for 210 spots in the medical school. So people are still applying to medical school despite the fact that being a physician is not quite what it used to be.
Which explains why there's offshore schools. Because the U.S. is importing a great deal of their doctors and nurses still. So they can't be created here.
Well, let's talk about a problem that everybody will admit to, maybe with their closest friends or after a few drinks, and that is everybody wishes that they had a smarter, faster workforce. I mean, there isn't any CEO who doesn't contemplate the idea that maybe they're not as strong as they think they should be and is looking to improve in certain areas. Peter Drucker always had a great answer to that, to CEOs who complain about mediocrity in their company, and that was, were they mediocre when you hired them or did they become mediocre under your watch? But we all, faced with this tough competition globally, faced with technological disruption everywhere, we all have a need to keep our workforce constantly learning and constantly getting better. What opportunities, Greg, are created by that desire that are not being filled by traditional educational systems?
Well, look, I think it goes back to actually, there was something that said that I completely agree with at one point, which is, if you get someone who loves what they're doing, that's your greatest form of success, right? I've been in Google's headquarters. I've seen the food carts and the dogs and even got on one of those scooters. It's pretty cool. But I would just point out that if you get an employee that really wants to be there, loves what they're doing, that trumps everything. And I want to ask the audience a question. Just raise your hand. How many of you did not come into your current employer through some traditional type of mechanism, a job board, there was an interview, they looked at your school, and you came in through a recruiter? Raise your hand if you didn't come in through that.
Did not?
Okay, so did not.
Yeah.
Did not. So there's a few in the room. And here's the reality of that, that we take jobs that are available. Sometimes we have to because it's the only job we can get or it's available or whatnot. But it ends up not being a great match. And the statistics show that 50% of the people that come in that way to their employment, they leave. They turn over, they're not happy for some reason, they don't do a good job, whether you're growing or not growing. And so what we're researching and trying to create as an example of how you might speed up the process of matching the right employee with the right employer is by giving them a look into the minds of people who are in colleges, universities, or they're training somewhere so that they can understand, if you can simulate your job on our platform, for instance, as one example, or somebody else's, and they can understand what skills you have or where your passions are, and without the friction of lining up the schools and doing the interviews and going through the whole process, which has some value to it as well, but it takes speed away from the equation and efficiency. You can match that up, and if the person doesn't have what it takes or the passion it takes, then the employer can actually say to the person, I'm not just going to send you a letter and tell you, sorry, thanks very much, it was nice of you to come in, here's some parting gifts. They're going to help you understand what you still need to do or why there wasn't a good fit. I think that the country needs to look more, to the future of how people are coming up today. Kids are coming up today on tablets and gaming, and it's just different than the baby boomers, than how we came up. And if we can move towards that and figure out solutions how to put people together with employers more effectively, then whether it's Google or not, or a company that's not growing, I think you're going to have a more sticky workforce that enjoys what they do and they're more productive, because turnover in this country costs us billions and billions and billions of dollars a year.
Yeah,
and lost GDP.
And this kind of silly credentialism, which I guess is just mainly driven by fear of lawsuits, prevents so many people who might be talented but simply don't have the credential to be talent and the passion. But pick up on, Lee, I'd love to have you pick up on this idea of technology and simulation technology and everything like that to A, provide better matches, and B, accelerate people's learning, because you know, in terms of psychological matches, it just kind of seems disappointing that we haven't come a long way since Myers-Briggs, and Myers-Briggs is what, 50 or 60 years old.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think just building on what Greg said, I think if you look at it from a company's perspective, I think one of the biggest challenges is that human resources as we know it is largely just fundamentally flawed. I would question if CEOs looked at HR as an operational function versus a support function, would they have different accountabilities? Because a lot of the organizations that I've worked with, human resources a bit sits itself in a vacuum and drives a lot of activities that aren't necessarily built and integrated into their business strategies. So to Paul's point, whether it's growth or whether it's turnaround, is the HR function really thinking through talent strategies that really integrate with that? So that's a big challenge. When you think about loving what you do, we do a lot of studies with the Gallup organization, and they've cited across the country 30% of the American workforce is engaged, meaning they emotionally connect to what they're doing. And that's a big problem, because 70% either are collecting paychecks or working against the company and trying to disparage what the company is trying to do. So how do you actually deal with that? 2 years ago, we were at that company average, and we measured our workforce. We were 30% engaged, and 2 years later, we just completed a study in March, and we've improved ourselves to 50% engaged. And a big component of that is really integrating what we do into our business strategy. But to Rich's point, you do have to bring in talent, and I think there's a couple mechanisms there. One, when you think about candidates, there are components that we typically look at, like skills and education, experience, and so forth. But this notion of innate capability is becoming much, much more important. Do the candidates really have the innate capability to, one, fit the culture, two, be able to drive the outcomes that the business needs to do in an emotionally connected way? And there's a lot of studies around that. When we think about selection tools, we are introducing, at least in our industry, the first selection tool that we've spent 6 months researching our very best. Tenured teachers that love what they do every day, and we've built composites and now understand what really makes these people tick in an industry that typically has had some high turnover, and what we found was pretty astonishing. And we've built a custom selection tool to begin screening. And as candidates come in and they want to teach or they want to be around children, do they have those innate talents that actually meet people that have been here for 15, 20 years, that can fit our culture and can be productive, can engage families, and really make a meaningful, measurable difference on children. So I think there's a lot of those pieces. The Myers-Briggs, the Lomingers, those things, they really haven't been updated for years, decades. And it's surprising to me how many companies still hold on to those things as part of their values. The reality is they're so disconnected to the culture that there's so much more need to focus on how do you know the DNA of your culture? How do you know what makes somebody successful? And how do you know whether or not the people you're bringing in actually fits that and also fits the business needs and the business strategies that you have?
Well, count me though as a skeptic about the idea that data and analytics are going to yield tremendous insights here. And I'll give you an example. Google is a very data and analytics driven culture, quite obviously. And, but now and then it backfires. And a case where it backfired was that, this is a few years ago, Google did multiple tests of a certain different shades of blue for its logo or its homepage or something like that. And they thought they got the right answer. And probably analytically it was the right answer for whatever point they were trying to prove. And they lost a bunch of their top designers in the process, walked out of the company because they didn't want to be, that's not what they signed up to do when they signed up to be homepage designers at Google. And so they solved the problem, whatever problem they wanted to solve, and it cost them a lot in ways that they couldn't see. And so therefore, you know, I want to talk about the role of the human being in a world that is becoming ever more driven by data and analytics, and how is that going to change the nature of how we staff our companies? Because there's a lot of promise there, I'll grant you that. There's tremendous promise in simulation, as Greg talked about, but
I mean, as the failing head of HR for several companies, I think some of the points you made are absolutely correct. That as a discipline, human resources has not really evolved, and the fact that we are talking about Lominger, and I was surprised you didn't say hey. But I will tell you though that part of it is the inefficiency that's in the system. And having now, as I said, worked for a company like Johnson & Johnson, 150,000 employees worldwide, 75 countries around the world, just trying to manage the volume in the system, that was a company that we went to using some level of technology just for screening resumes. So if you think about the traditional ways that individuals express an interest in a company, by sending in a CV. There is no way with the volume over 100,000 resumes just about every month. There is no way that you could manage that in the old way. So we went to a selection methodology where you use scanning technology. And quite frankly, it's pretty common across most of the organizations, large organizations, just because of the volume. What became really interesting is leaving the Pfizers and the Johnson & Johnsons of the world and going to a smaller, so this is where scale matters, a smaller biotech company, for all intents and purposes a mature startup, and really applying the decision science, because what Google does is they use decision science. They actually build algorithms that really helps them identify, using various technology, certain capability sets of individuals. But that doesn't reduce the need then for, because some of the things you're talking about, you can absolutely search for, you can do it more efficiently, you can probably do it more, I would argue, more scientifically, and perhaps you could even argue to some degree of precision. But one of the things that was important to us, because we were building a company and a culture, we needed to have that interaction with the individual to really have that conversation with the individual, to be clear that there was a match, not just that the person was interested in the company, but because of the nature of what we did, discover, develop, and got to market oncology drugs. Our company was all about patients, and it was all about that identification with the patient and our ability to help every single employee understand how what he or she did connected with getting therapy to patients quickly. And we had a mantra, our chief medical officer used to say that while we were sitting around debating an issue, patients were dying. So this sense of urgency and all of those things were embedded in how we created a culture. So the human interaction was really a place around how do you make sure that we can translate that for you. And the interviews were not 12 interviews, as you described, which is typically what you still find in HR. We discovered that you probably didn't need more than 3 or 4 touch points, and we called it the candidate experience. We really wanted you to have an experience of us that helped you be clear about whether or not this was the place you wanted to come and bring your considerable talent. That is a fundamentally different way, and the work that I and the rest of the HR team did was really around helping the business understand whether or not the things we wanted to do, double overall survival in multiple myeloma, which was the area in which we were working, was that attainable? Because that basically was what we call our big, hairy, audacious goal, our BHAG. And my job was to find out whether or not we could do that. Could we take this company to a place through not just talent, but through the culture and through market entry, by determining which markets in Europe would you go into? And did I understand enough of the regulatory approach in Europe? So the only reason I'm giving you that example is because I do think there is an opportunity for a different approach to HR and to talent And really, a lot of the work that I'm doing now, because we just sold the company, is really around, can we make this more the norm as opposed to what you're talking about? Because it is that inefficiency in the system that really is getting in our way. Because I will argue there is enough talent in the world for the jobs that need to be done. And I think we do ourselves a disservice when we keep talking about the fact that there's a war on talent. There's a fundamental mismatch between capability, availability, and the jobs that are out there. And that's where the solutions have got to come from. And we are unwilling or unable to invest the time and the effort to create that match. And we allow the inefficiency in the system and the traditional ways that we've approached the system to be barriers to the solution as opposed to enablers to the solution. And maybe that makes me an outlier, but I fundamentally believe we have enough talent to solve the issues that we're dealing with as a company and, quite frankly, as a global economy.
Yeah, I think if 70% of people are not engaged, that shows you how much energy and is being left on the floor. Let's talk about the importance of intangibles like grit and perseverance. Grit seems to be getting a lot of attention in the press these days, and yet how do you measure for that? How do you you want people who have that kind of persistence and patience and courage and so forth. How do you screen for that, and how do you encourage that to grow inside of an organization? I'll start with you, Larry.
You know, I feel a little bit somewhat inferior when we're talking about hundreds of thousands of applicants when what we're talking about is a little bit smaller. But you know, we deal fundamentally with a little different problem in that we're asking people who finished 4 years of medical school to make some decision as to what they want to do for the rest of their life. And that decision is pretty fixed in terms of specialty choice. And do you really know that you want to be a neurosurgeon when you're 25 years old or 26 years old? One of the things, prior to the current situation I'm in, I was the chairman of surgery at the University of Pennsylvania for a number of years, and we looked at attrition in the residency program, which is a significant issue. Somebody decides they want to do a surgery residency and then drops out after a year or so, and we looked at some of the factors that account for why people dropped out, and they were very interesting in terms of what we found. And one of the things we did was look at our selection process, and it gets into what some of the other panelists were saying. And we actually went to a structured interview and randomized applicants to these structured interviews and found that, or just the standard interview where people were saying, well, you know, what do you like to do? And we found that the structured interview actually caused the attrition rate to go way down. And some of this is just people deciding that this is the right place for them. Some of it is they decided they really weren't interested in doing surgery. And it gets into this whole situation about wanting to be a certain thing and actually wanting to do it. And whether or not at that age you can actually make the decision as to what you want to actually do, you know, is somewhat debatable. So therefore we had to be fairly careful about the selection. And that's becoming more of an issue now with students sort of looking at lifestyle issues more important, I think, than what they ultimately choose to do. And this is going to become an issue because everybody in this room is going to have some dependency on physician talent, and whether it's primary care or specialty care, it's going to make a huge difference in how we structure that workforce. And obviously the numbers are certainly smaller than the hundreds of thousands, but part of it does get down into this whole issue of passion. And certainly a career in medicine, I think we are looking for that passion, and people who may start off in surgery decide that's not what they want to do, and obviously they're sadly mistaken if they don't realize that that is what they want to do, and obviously misguided, but we do have to recognize that. So I think, you know, part of this is, and it gets into what the others were saying, I think that there are qualities that we look for and that we select for, and hopefully that gets back into the selection for medical school as well.
Well, just as a follow-up, I interviewed a couple of liver transplant surgeons at Mayo in Rochester, Minnesota. One was a man, one was a woman, and they frankly talked about how they always wanted the other one in the room because each of them had things that they could do uniquely well, but had some weaknesses too. One of them was a little prone to panic when a lot of things can go wrong.
Not good for a surgeon.
No.
How was your day today?
Well,
You know.
well, particularly as they described it, the liver transplants where so many curveballs can happen. There's so many blood vessels that feed into the liver, then they can all start bleeding, and one of them just would hit the point where they couldn't be effective anymore. But we're much better at routine surgeries. So they were both frank about that, both knew about that. How do you, what observations can you give us, Paul, about those intangibles? Grace under pressure, calmness under pressure, courage, grit.
I was going to say, how did I get the liver transplant thing?
The business is declining
is
anyway
it?
because we can cure Hep C now, so the liver transplant business is
Where
going
is
to.
that going? Well, first of all, I don't know that I've got a good answer to that. Let me. If there's anything I probably have a point of view on, given the last 6.5 years in a financial services firm, I know a little something about crisis, just because we've had a few. Here's one observation I would make. In a crisis, I've come to believe there are two kinds of people, right? There's amplifiers and there's absorbers. An amplifier is somebody, when they see a problem that's this big, they make it sound this big, right? A little bit like Chicken Little, right? Where it's, and they drive you crazy. And what every CEO I've ever met wants to be surrounded by are absorbers. People who can make a problem that's this big, take one that's this big, and make it feel like it's this big, right? Because they sort of think clearly about what has to be done. Here's the issue, and what drives me nuts, just in my own life, is people who, at the least provocation, come in and can amplify and in that way make it worse. You're giving me the fisheye here, bud.
No, I'm thinking of embarrassing moments in my own life when I was more of an amplifier. Shot dead.
All that drama.
Yeah, drama queen is what I would have used. Questions from the audience. We have about 15 minutes left, and the gentleman in the back has a mic, and you can ask anything of anyone, or I'll keep going. We have one up here.
Thank you. At the beginning, you sort of framed the problem, or one of the problems, as a large availability of unemployed people with some level of qualification and a large number of open spots where companies are unable to find the talent that that they like. If we roll the clock backward 20 years or so, selectivity of people was much lower because visibility of applicants was much, much lower, both geographically and through different sources, and many companies relied heavily on training and development programs, some of which were pretty extensive. Most of what's changed in the last 20 years has been through technology, much greater transparency, much greater pool size, increase in specificity of jobs, or increase in specificity of criteria for jobs, but you would say the problem persists. Do you think that the answer is to continue in this direction of removing more and more and more friction from the available matchmaking between employer and workforce, or do you think we'll see a pendulum swing back a little bit to greater investment and development on the part of the companies?
I'll take a crack at it. I actually think it's both. Back to the point about the mismatch, part of what happens is companies keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
Which is the definition of insanity. Right?
Thank you very much. Because, when I reflect on 20, 30 years ago when I first got into the field, much of the ways in which we approached selection, attraction of talent, very few of those things have changed today. And therefore, I think there has got to be a radical shift in the way in which we actually are, the process of selection itself has to change. Because it's probably one of the places where we have not taken advantage of advanced technology. Yes, we use technology to screen resumes and we look for keywords, but really helping us to understand where talent is and how to source that talent and to do it differently is not something that is widespread. So I'll give you a specific example. At the company that I mentioned, Onyx Pharmaceuticals, one of the things that we did most of our sourcing out of India. And the reason we did most of our sourcing out of India was not because the talent we were looking for was in India, but it allowed us to really operate around the clock with a certain, again, remember I talked about developing a set of algorithms that helped us understand, certainly at some level, the talent we were looking for. It enabled us to do that on an ongoing basis. So we were not bounded by the 9 to 5 geographic timeline we were here. That's number one. The second thing is, and I go back to the point that you made, I have a fundamental belief that talent, the development of talent, selection of talent, retention of talent, is not HR's job. That construct has not changed in the 30 years I've been doing this work. The fundamental ownership of the human capital and assets in an organization is the responsibility of the leaders of that business. The job of HR is defining the processes, bringing the tools to the table, equipping you as a leader with the best set of tools and capability to select individuals and develop those individuals and be able to get the most out of those individuals to build a great company. And until that shifts, we are going to continue to be in this place where we are, where there's this fundamental mismatch. And there's two things preventing that. One, it's the ego of HR professionals, because I know that plenty of my colleagues will find it heretical that I could say that the fundamental ownership of talent does not belong with HR. We own systems, we own process. We are supposed to be really helping you with what is the leading practices and really educating you. But the fundamental ownership of that talent is really resident with the leaders who at the end of the day have the accountability for developing and owning that talent. So back to the question you asked me, that's where the transformation has to occur, because when that transformation occurs, you will absolutely start to see, I think, some of this mismatch and the inefficiency in the system. You will start to see some of that actually start to decline. And then the second part around training and development, absolutely, because the speed at which, if I just think about oncology research, the speed at which drug development and research is occurring, there is no way that unless you continue to keep your employees exposed, and unless you do that in an intentional way to both technical training but leadership development, you will constantly fall behind. And there's no question that you've got to invest in it. And I think about those things, quite frankly, as investments, not costs to be written off, but investments where you expect to have a return for higher productivity and a higher level of engagement in the workforce.
Well, I'd like to hear about our, well, let's get this gentleman here. We've got hands, okay.
Okay, that's awesome, by the way. I really appreciate it. I'm one of those hiring managers at a firm that takes where the hiring manager takes responsibility for who they hire.
Thank you.
And I guess the department we have is called personnel, not HR. So, right, because it's, you know, they don't. So about 10 years ago, I discovered that what I need to do is hire for attitude and aptitude over education and experience. And what I want is a good heart and a giving personality. So I developed an approach that involves getting all my best candidates together, and by best I mean they make a coherent case that they'd like to do the work, and I organize them to help each other find work, and that's how I test for a good heart and a giving personality. So my metric is not just how well I handle the process of picking somebody who will work for me, but how well I develop people, even the people I don't hire. Mm-hmm. So my question for all of you is there any responsibility of companies to the people they do not hire? Because the job market is broken, and the fundamental way it's broken is it rewards people for being good at getting a job. Mm-hmm. And that's the last thing I need you to be good at, is getting a job. I need you to be good at doing the job. The reason I help people get good at getting a job is because that's what they say they want, and if I can't motivate them to do what they say they want, it's going to be hard for me to motivate them to do what I want.
Isn't that where simulation
And-
technology could really break through the barrier?
I mean,
that
that's
John was
one.
talking
One.
about?
I mean, what you're saying is you want somebody to show you that they not only want to do the job and they love the job, but they can do the job. Those three things together.
Well, I want them to illustrate their ability to, I want them to demonstrate a good heart and a giving personality. Because in general, the job I'm hiring for, they cannot do without being in an environment that provides the
Right,
capital
and
and resources.
I think you are going to see more and more of that become apparent over the next several years, because we do have the ability to do that. One division of Apollo called Lightspeed is building the largest marketplace that consumers can go to, or people in HR or corporations, where if you're looking to hire somebody, or if you're a consumer looking for a job, you might go on there and see, 5,000 positions or jobs in certain areas. And now it's going to want to know what are your level of skills, show us. And it literally matches you with what you need over the quickest period of time so you fit that position. That's only one piece of it, right? Because then there's the heart and soul piece of it. And then there might be interviews after that. But it's the ability to quickly take millions and millions of people that are not being connected appropriately, which is why we have tens of billions of dollars of cost to GDP from massive turnover in this country, because we don't find good matches for people. There is a better way to do it than the way we're doing it now. And you're about to see that with the marketplace construct that's coming.
I think one position from an employer's perspective, I think our primary obligation is to figure out how to engage our own workforce, and that is about hiring the right people, integrating them, and those type of things. When I think about our company, we have the privilege to work with other organizations to develop on-site, near-site, customized child care centers, and many times they are an extension of that corporate culture. And we play the game of, do ping pong tables in companies really make a difference in engaging in the workplace? Well, you could talk about the same thing related to child care centers. Taking our own medicine, there's a couple of basic statistics, and to the point of this panel, we think about what's the role of human resources, and how do you distinguish the difference between nice to haves, ping pong tables, and need to haves. And what we found in our own company is that we continually deal with turnover. If we have an employee that leverages our own child care centers, we have a 30% greater chance of retaining them. That's data. With a massive opportunity for us to have a better culture, to retain employees better, and so forth. So if we were to go to companies and we would say, here's some statistics. Almost 60% of our workforce today has husbands and wives working. Department of Labor says almost 70% of absenteeism is related to child care issues. How do you connect the dots around need to have services for your organization, not only to build a culture, but to help address fundamental issues around what employees need, so then you can prosper and you can meet your goals and so forth. And those are things that I think from an HR side, they need to begin thinking through their role at the table. We joke around, a lot of HR practitioners talk about having a role at the table. I think the question is, do they know what to do when they're there? And it's having that sort of data and insight to help an organization along is the key.
Can I take a crack?
I have
at a
the mic.
Can I take a crack at a couple things?
A quick crack so we can get this
I know.
person in.
Maybe I've just been asleep at the wheel in terms of HR being disengaged from the business and somehow locked in the Pleistocene era. I'm not sure. I'm not convinced of it. When I look at good practice, and certainly the outside of where I work, I think there's a lot of good practice of people who don't necessarily look for best practice in the world, but actually looks to do exactly what fits in their business. I don't think it's that unusual to find good people in HR who do what works in their business to deliver the outcome. to your question of what do we owe people who don't get the job, if there's three questions that I deal with, no matter who I talk to, whether it's direct reports of the CEO or people that I'm hiring off campus, they all want to know three things. How am I doing? Where do I stand? And what do I have to do to get better? And I have that conversation constantly. And so if there's anything that we owe people, whether we hire them or we don't, it's the answers to those three questions on a regular basis.
Yeah. Next question.
Thank you. I'm Carol Kretschmann, and I have a question for you guys on the panel. I've developed a technology that's mobile. It's a platform and a player that goes into any mobile device, and it sends video. And we're in the process right now of developing for a major merchandiser an idea of how to reach employees. And I was interested, because if we were able to communicate with the employee through their mobile device, new information that the company has, whether it's intelligence and new stuff that's going on in the company, new problems with human resource, or just to continue the conversation between the company and their employees using the new device. Is that something that you guys would find interesting? You're talking about continuing education. You're talking about communication with your employees. You're talking about a two-way kind of focus. And if you have thousands of employees, it's going to be really difficult for 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 people who are in the human resource department. So we feel that this is taking a new look at how mobile devices are used, using it for enterprise, specifically for the kind of management things that you've been talking about.
Anyone?
Well, I think that delivering information and using technology to do it to your employees, we don't have hundreds of thousands. We have 45,000 employees and faculty within our structure. And we are trying to get them information quickly and efficiently and when they need it. So that structure of what you're talking about, absolutely it can be useful. I think that when you bombard employees with emails and they don't know which ones to open and they're coming from different departments and there's this compliance and that and what, then you don't have their attention. So from my perspective, it's choosing the right path and how often you're repeating the behavior so that they get engaged, in wanting to see what you have to offer, not just because you're ramming it down their throat.
Well, Salesforce Chatter would be an example
Yes,
of something that's very specific and useful for
Salesforce.
salespeople. Next question.
So there was a comment made that it's a lot easier to manage a company when the stock price is going up. No one has talked about equity ownership and options or RSUs or whatever. I'm a private equity investor. I think one of the things that makes private equity investing better is the equity is much more broadly and much more deeply put into the company, and everybody thinks like an owner. And some of those elbows don't go up because everybody's thinking, hey, at the end of the day, it's how do we get better EBITDA and a better result. So any thoughts or comments about how do you get people thinking more like owners and that as a key motivating technique?
Options.
And you're making all your employees take a lot of stock these days, Paul.
Yeah,
So.
we kind of like that. Yeah. Options aren't popular for a variety of reasons. But having lived through an era where we did grant options and living in a company where everybody did absolutely feel a connection to the business, I've always thought it makes a big difference. I think it does add to a feeling of, we're a part of this, and we all benefit when it goes up.
I would agree. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I would agree. The shift that over the last decade or so that I have made with respect to thinking about equity is really, instead of purely focusing on time-based equity, really focusing on performance-based equity. And given that all three of the companies that I worked with, have worked for, have been publicly traded companies, and given the kind of SEC regulations and writing proxies and disclosure requirements, options may have, quote unquote, fallen out of favor, but I found that a blend of options, particularly for the CEO and the C-suite executives, is not just the right way to go, it's critical. because individuals at that level of the organization, if they truly are the strategic leaders of the business, they need to demonstrate that they have faith in the long-term viability of the business. So that would argue for some blend of stock options and restricted shares. Restricted shares we used a lot in Europe because of the granting practices with respect to equity in Europe, which means that on grant it's a taxable event with a few examples, so they're not as attractive as a tool in Europe. So we use restricted shares there a lot. But in the last probably decade or so, I've really migrated to using performance-based equity, which means that the payout isn't just timed about passage of time. It really is around some very specific deliverables. And we found that when we've used that blend, and we've used it down the entire organization, that it is critical, not just in an ownership mindset, but in alignment around a critical set of priorities that actually move the business forward. So that's my experience.
How are we doing on time? Okay, we'll make this the last question.
Yeah, hi. Colin Tate is my name from Connexus Financial in Australia. Two quick questions. One from Wei Lee. You spoke of improving engagement from 30% to 50%. If you could please articulate how. And just for the panel, I haven't heard any discussion around Generation X and Y and even younger, and their attention spans of being microseconds and their loyalty being zero. How do you actually recruit, retain, and engage much, much younger people as distinct from all you old guys on the stage?
That's great. So I'll take the first piece. And
thanks for the feedback. Appreciate that.
I'll tell you, for engagement for us, and it marries to the last question, we have 30,000 employees across 1,700 centers. They average between $11 and $13 an hour. So you're talking about a non-exempt workforce, which makes it in larger ways sometimes more difficult to engage. Ownership is a big part of it. We've moved to a model where we want our employees to feel accountable for their outcomes, and a lot of the systems that Kay talked about we're putting in place. But we think fundamentally there's 4 criteria that helps engage an employee. One, they fundamentally need to know what you expect them to do. So many people, if you just ask your employees, what do you expect, what are your expectations of your role, how many people in the like job would answer that very differently. So that's a big piece. Second is they need to feel supported. That not only includes their manager and having the conversations that this panel talked about, having not the annual performance and management process, but having regular discussions about progress and capability. The third piece is employees want to feel like they belong to something bigger. So the sense of belonging, teamwork, being part of a mission, part of a culture, particularly with the younger workforce, is critical. And the last piece that we look at is they want to feel progress. They want to feel growth personally and be part of a team that is growing. If you can hit all those 4 pieces, that's been a big part of our progress.
I've gotten the sign that we need to stop because we just simply, the mechanics of clearing the room. Let's give the panelists a big hand.